Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea's consumer prices rose last month by 2.6%, exceeding the Bank of Korea's target for a fourth month in a row. The impacts being felt especially in grocery prices. South Korea's intelligence agency says the recent restoration of communications between the two Koreas was requested personally by North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. The regime might also be looking to restore ties in exchange for Seoul canceling its military drills with Washington. And South Korea is taking part in a series of multilateral meetings this week, some of which will be joined by North Korea. These started today with a meeting of the foreign ministers of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. South Korea today reported that consumer inflation in July was at 2.6%. And if you're buying groceries or filling up the gas tank in Korea, you may have noticed the bill getting a little bigger. Inflation's been especially noticeable when it comes to food, and it has been in other countries too, in part because of poor weather hitting supplies. Kim Sung-min reports.
If you feel like you're having to pay a little more for almost everything these days, from groceries to gas, well, you're right on that. For example, if I bought this packet of ramen for 60 cents, then from 2 weeks' time, it'll cost me 64 cents.
South Korea's biggest ramen producers are raising prices to cover the rising costs of ingredients like flour and palm oil. And such a surge in prices can be seen across the country, from oil prices to the cost of dining out or traveling. What affects us the most is, of course, groceries prices. Both eggs and garlic saw price jumps of around 50%, forcing consumers to be thriftier.
And this is not just a matter of choosing cheaper options at grocery stores. For hundreds of thousands of restaurants, just like the ones behind me, their livelihoods are at stake.
72-year-old restaurant owner Song Myung-sup says he has no choice but to endure the damage from inflation as he's seeing a drop in sales amid the pandemic.
45%. The raw material prices rose 45%. It's now a little bit lower than winter, but it's still expensive. But I cannot raise the price of the dishes. So restaurant owners like us are bound to take the heat.
It'll take some time for the flare-up in food commodities to cool down, since the inflation is currently a global trend. The monthly food price index compiled by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations has surged over the past year, with May showing the biggest on-year jump in a decade. This is due to poor weather across the world, like cold waves and droughts in the US, Brazil, and Argentina. Although global food price inflation has passed the peak, it'll take a few months for the decline to be felt by consumers. Based on these factors, the International Monetary Fund expects global food prices to rise by 3.2% over the course of this year. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
The global shortage of semiconductors, which has affected many different industries around the world, hit sales at Hyundai Motor last month. The company says sales were down in July by 2.4% from a year earlier. In total, Hyundai sold a little under 310,000 vehicles globally. Overseas sales were up 4.2% to around 250,000 units, but sales in Korea plunged more than 22% to under 60,000. This is Hyundai's first monthly sales decline so far this year. Because of the chip shortage, Hyundai had to temporarily stop production earlier this year at its plant in ASEAN. And since the pandemic began, home prices have been rising around the world in the broadest increase in decades. This has been true in South Korea, too. In general, economists say this is because of low interest rates and high savings rates, especially for those who were already better off. Kim Hyo-sun has this report.
The pandemic has triggered the biggest spike in global house prices in nearly 3 decades, reviving economists' concerns over its potential threat to financial stability. According to the Financial Times, annual house price growth across 40 OECD member states hit 9.4% in the first quarter of 2021. During the same period, only 3 countries experienced real-term price declines, with the smallest margin since data was first compiled in 2000. Data also suggests that house prices continue to increase in the second quarter as well, with the U.S. witnessing its fastest annual rate in nearly 30 years in April. Strong growth persisted in South Korea, Britain, New Zealand, and Canada as well. In South Korea, house prices rose an average of more than 26% over the last 12 months in the country's 9 major regions, including Seoul, Gyeonggi-do Province, and Busan. The Financial Times quoted economists who explained that low borrowing costs made home purchases more affordable. In addition, the article also pointed to the fact that many households, especially those who are better off, accumulated large amount of savings during the early stages of the pandemic as prolonged lockdowns limited their spending. At the same time, it adds people preferred to move to bigger houses as they had to spend more time at home due to antivirus restrictions. While house prices growth can be a positive factor in the short term as property owners feel richer and spend more due to the valuation of their assets, economists warn it could lead to an unsustainable boom long term, especially when it's accompanied by strong credit expansion. Kim Hye-san, Arirang News.
The cabinet today approved a decree that'll give people in South Korea an extra weekday off for a few more public holidays in case those holidays fall on weekends. That'll mean 3 more days off this year. Substitute holidays will now apply if needed to March 1st Independence Movement Day, National Liberation Day, National Foundation Day, and Hangul Day. Before, this system was only for New Year's Day, Korean Thanksgiving, and Children's Day. When these holidays fall on a Saturday or Sunday, the next weekday is a day off. This means most people will not have to go to work this year on August 16th, October 4th, and October 11th. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, Global Strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, good afternoon. Thanks for coming on today.
Good afternoon.
Well, stocks on Wall Street were higher for most of the session on Monday, but ended up lower, at least in part because of the threat of the Delta variant of the coronavirus. What's the story in the global markets?
Yes, if you look at the U.S. market, it was quite confusing. At the beginning of the session, it did quite a bit of a performance, but towards the end of it, most of the rise went sour, and the Dow Jones ended with about 0.3% decline, and S&P 500 went down by about 0.2%. And small and mid cap also went down by 0.35%. Only index that went up was the NASDAQ, which was slightly up by about 0.06%. If you look at the positive indicators, clearly the robust economic recovery and very strong results were the main reason why the market was quite strong at the beginning of the session. But as towards the end of the session, there's been a concern about the ISM manufacturing PMI number, which is coming in at much weaker than expected. And overall, Chinese impact, where a lot of people are indicating that China's overall growth are slowing down quite rapidly, and that would have a negative implication for global domestic consumption. So therefore, people are concerned that the market might not be as strong due to the possibility of weaker economic numbers coming through. The aspect of the COVID-19, the variant, Delta variant, is still quite negative, that the overall infections are rising quite rapidly on a global scale. All in all, people are quite confused whether or not the current level of the very strong market that we saw from the U.S. can last while most of the other countries seem to be fairly suffering in the past about a month or so.
Right, and it was a little confusing today on the Korean market as well, up and down, but higher in the end on the Kospi at least. There were gains in various sectors, including semiconductors, some pharmaceuticals. Tell us about the domestic market. Yes,
the Korean market actually did fairly reasonably okay. It went up by about 0.34% for Kospi. Kosdaq was down quite significantly, ended slightly better than the beginning. It ended with a 0.29% decline. If you look at the market South Korea manufacturing PMI number, it declined to 53.0 from the June number of 53.9, indicating that there is a bit of a concern regarding the overall economic recovery per se. Clearly, global economy might be slowing down going into the future, and that's the main reason why people are concerned about the Korea's export. But, I mean, as we know, the numbers that already came out seems to be very strong. If you look at the retail sales number, it's risen by 1.6% year-on-year in June of 2021. And also, if you look at the export numbers, it remains to be about 30% growth year-on-year for the July, and recorded record high level of 55.4 billion of the export. All in all, it is a mix of signals because of the COVID variant might have a negative implication for domestic consumption, while the export numbers seems to be reasonably very strong, and Korea is one of the largest exporter of the global scale, and that clearly is a positive indications. Going into the future, I guess people will be selective in terms of where to buy. Clearly, today's movement is indicating that the at least semiconductor industry and the electric car / battery industry, it seems to be one of the major industry that Korea is showing very strong growth and achieve valuation at the current point in time. So we do think that this kind of trend that happened today would continue at least going into the next several months or so.
Well, now looking at cryptocurrencies for a minute, the price of Bitcoin is down the past couple of days on news that the U.S. Senate's infrastructure bill will require crypto exchanges to report their customers' gains to the IRS. Some investors, though, do say this will help bring crypto into the mainstream. What do you see happening in the crypto space?
Yes, cryptocurrency, the Bitcoin prices seems to be very volatile at the current point in time. If you look at the prices, it did go down to as low as 29,000 or so at July 20th. And then if you look at the overall right now, the prices have risen quite significantly from its bottom to over 32,000 or so, which was it was risen by about over 40% plus. But as I just said, the Bitcoin price has fallen down again to about 38,400 level because of the regulatory environment is indicating that there's continued to be some concern about the credibility or, say, long-term future of the cryptocurrencies. But if we look at the Elon Musk and Jack Dorsey, what they're saying is that they're a major backer of the cryptocurrencies. And even though the digital currency comes out from the U.S. central bank, but still the demand for the cryptocurrency, overall crypto assets per se, should remain reasonably strong. If that's the case, then we cannot say the cryptocurrency can substitute for the currency of U.S. dollars, but at least similar to, say, what happened to the gold and silver in the past histories, we think the cryptocurrency can be received as an alternative asset that could be similar to or role of gold or silver in the past. And going into the future, we think that cryptocurrency is not going to disappearing. We think that is a necessity asset class where people will continue to be looking at. Nevertheless, we think that cryptocurrency is not in a situation where it can rise as we have seen in the past. We think that overall growth rate of the alternative assets should be remaining at about 20 to 15% per annum, similar to the range of the M1 growth rate that we've seen in the past. So, yes, cryptocurrency will be volatile, but nevertheless, it's something that we need to look at.
And finally, Mr. Yu, before we go, talk about inflation for a minute. Consumer prices up more than 2.5% last month, and this is the fourth month in a row it's been above the BOK's target of 2%. Core inflation, which does not include volatile food and oil prices, was up 1.2%. What do you see driving prices higher, and where do we go from here?
Yes, I think that the overall inflation number is something that we expected. We expected that number will be stronger than expected, and it came at 2.6% for July, which is actually rising from the 2.4% in the previous number. We think that, though, in a longer-term basis, inflation number should remain at around 2% territories. We think that the reason why these stronger prices are happening is because domestic consumers and domestic consumption numbers in a global scale seem to be very strong overall. And we did see quite a bit of the raw material cost going up, which has resulted into the Korea's inflation to be stronger than stronger than expected. However, still 2.6% is still very, very weak relative to U.S. inflation. So we think that the normalization would expect it to happen for U.S. as well as Korea. As I said, 2% range of the inflation. It's very positive news per se because stronger inflation is better than the deflation, and that asset prices going up would have a positive implication for a lot of the industries. So we think that the overall inflation number of Korea would be reasonably going up. It's just that it's not going to be so strong, but per se it should be somewhere between 2 to 2.5% year growth rate over the next several months.
Got it. All right, Ms. G, we'll leave it there for today. Thanks so much for joining us as always. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
South Korea's intelligence agency says the recent restoration of inter-Korean communication channels was initiated after a request by North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. The NIS also says that the regime's warning against the upcoming South Korea-U.S. joint military drills might be a sign that it's willing to improve ties if those drills are called off. Kim Da-mi has more.
The recent restoration of long-severed communication channels between the two Koreas came upon the request of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. This is according to Seoul's National Intelligence Service during a parliamentary briefing on Tuesday. Seoul and Pyongyang had been talking on the phone twice a day since last Tuesday when they reopened their cross-border communication line some 13 months after the North unilaterally severed it in protest of propaganda leaflets coming from the South. Regarding the recent warning by the North against the joint Seoul-Washington military drills, the intelligence agency analyzed that it's the regime's willingness to advance inter-Korean ties in return for calling off the exercises. The NIS director Park Ji-won added that the government needs to review ways to flexibly handle the matter in order to keep the momentum for inter-Korean talks and denuclearizing the regime. Park also dismissed the speculation over a possible fourth inter-Korean summit, underlining that Seoul has not requested one. While no details about the upcoming drills are yet known other than they're set to take place mid-August, Seoul's Unification Ministry has reiterated its position that the exercises need to be delayed. Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department said Monday that Washington stays committed to maintaining the combined defense posture of the Seoul-Washington alliance. The Pentagon has also stayed firm on its stance that the alliance between the two Koreas has kept the military readiness at a high level. Also on Tuesday, the NIS made it clear that Kim Jong-un has shown no signs of ill health, brushing off speculation over a recent photo showing a medical plaster on the back of his head. Kim Da-mi, Arirang News.
South Korea today held a ministerial meeting with the countries of ASEAN to discuss ways to reinforce their cooperation on the pandemic. This week, we'll see a series of multilateral meetings, in fact, including the ASEAN Regional Forum, which also involves North Korea. Yoon Jung-min reports.
At a virtual meeting on Tuesday of the South Korea and ASEAN foreign ministers, Seoul's foreign minister pledged to deepen cooperation with Southeast Asian countries to overcome the COVID-19 pandemic and highlighted the need for strong global solidarity.
The Republic of Korea will work together with ASEAN members, fully investing in the priorities set out in the New Southern Policy Plus, aligning them with the objectives of the ASEAN Comprehensive Recovery Framework.
Also discussed were the South Korea-ASEAN summit slated for October, vaccine partnerships, economic recovery, and issues related to Myanmar. Regarding the restoration last week of inter-Korean communication lines, ASEAN voiced support for engagement for dialogue with North Korea. On the same day, South Korea also took part in the ASEAN Plus 3 meeting involving China and Japan to discuss responses to COVID-19 and efforts toward an economic recovery. A series of virtual meetings are set to take place this week, including the East Asia Summit Foreign Ministers meeting on Wednesday, which involves the US, China, Japan, and Russia. The agenda there will include regional and global affairs as well as COVID-19 and climate change. On Friday, South Korea takes part in the ASEAN Regional Forum, or ARF, which involves North Korea, the US, China, and Japan to discuss Korean Peninsula issues and other regional affairs. At last year's virtual ARF, North Korea's ambassador to Indonesia took part on behalf of the regime's foreign minister. It has yet to be announced who will be participating from the North this year, but there is speculation that the North Korean ambassador will join this year's forum too. However, a senior official at the U.S. State Department said Monday that they do expect it'll be the North Foreign Minister, though Secretary Antony Blinken has no plans to engage with him. The State Department says North Korea will be on the agenda during meetings with ASEAN this week, along with the South China Sea and Myanmar issues. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
And South Korea has again reported more than 1,000 new coronavirus cases, and now almost 40% of new cases are outside the Greater Seoul area. The authorities are especially concerned about the Delta variant contributing to a rise in so-called breakthrough cases. Paeun-ji has more.
South Korea confirmed 1,202 new COVID-19 cases on Tuesday. The daily caseload has remained above the 1,000 mark for almost a month now since July 7th. The cases have been mostly centered on the Greater Seoul area, but recently more cluster infections have been seen in the rest of the country. Cases outside the capital region now account for almost 40% of locally transmitted cases. More than 90 cases came from the southeastern city of Busan on Tuesday. Of those cases, 7 were from a cluster infection that broke out in a call center. The country also reported more than 1,100 infections from those who have been fully vaccinated, including 8 patients in critical condition. Of them, 254 had gotten the AstraZeneca vaccine, 284 had received Pfizer, 584 had Janssen, and 10 had mixed shots.
Out of about 6.3 million people who had been vaccinated in Korea, breakthrough cases account for 0.018%. This means 17.8 people per 100,000 people had been infected, which is 1/5 the amount compared to the US.
So far, the health authorities have done a gene analysis on 243 of the breakthrough cases and found that 150 were variant cases. Of those variant cases, 85% were the Delta variant. Further adding to concerns, the number of patients in critical condition has been rising among those in their 40s and 50s.
There were 5.6 times more deaths than patients in critical condition for those in their 40s and 50s in the second week of July compared to the second week of June.
As the COVID-19 situation gets more serious, a survey from the Health Ministry showed that 84% of South Koreans think the level 4 distancing measures in the capital region should be extended. The survey also showed that only 28% of Koreans feel that they are safe from the virus since the 4th wave of the outbreak hit the country. Paeun-ji, Arirang News.
At the Olympics this afternoon, South Korean diver Woo Ha-ram finished in 4th place in the 3-meter springboard final. That's the best finish by a Korean diver at the Olympics. In 6 dives, Woo accumulated just shy of 482 points, putting him about 36 points behind the British diver who won bronze. The gold and silver medals both went to divers from China. Meanwhile, this evening at 7:50, Korean weightlifter Jin Yoon-sung will be competing for a medal in the men's 109-kilogram weight class. Jin's at a disadvantage, though, because he normally competes at 102 kilograms, which is not a class at the Olympics. Still, he won silver at the World Championships in 2019, so fans are hoping he can win a medal in Tokyo, too. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.